Warhammer 40k, like D&D and many tabletop games, is a mosaic of inspirations. Some of its lore and characters share only a nominal resemblance to their outside origins, while some are brazenly obvious. You could venture a guess that Space Marines, for example, were inspired by stormtroopers, and most people would probably shrug and assume you're right. But for some factions like the Tyranids, it's pretty apparent what the game's creators cribbed from. There's no shame in doing that, obviously. Most, if not all, works are derivative. But by that same token, that means there shouldn't be any shame in doing that ourselves with the miniatures we paid for. This was a long preamble. I'm taking Games Workshop's grade value xenomorphs and modifying them to resemble one of my favorite 70s superheroes, Kamen Rider Amazon. You're watching Apollo Geist. So the first thing we need to do before getting to work is planning out exactly what we're doing. There are three main modifications I want to make to the Tyranids. 1, I want to give them insectoid compound eyes. 2, I want to give them some fruity little ascots. And 3, I want to give them Amazon's weird anglerfish antenna. After making a digital mock-up along with some colors, I set about to work. Leaving the arms for most of these off-rees of handling, I started with the eyes using green stuff. We'll be using this for all the modifications, by the way. One habit I try to follow when sculpting something onto a mini is to blend it onto the surface first so the bond between the pieces is solid and I can move it around without the risk of pushing the putty off. Then I sculpt it into its proper shape using silicone tip tools slicked with Vaseline. There's a bit of inconsistency in the eye size between each Tyranid, but I don't really mind that. They're organic creatures after all. By the time I applied all the eyes, the green stuff had hardened a fair bit, meaning I could add some additional detail without deforming them. I used the finest ball tip tool I had to push little indentations onto the eyes so they have some visual interest. For the ascots, I took some green stuff, rolled it out thin-like using some Vaseline in a nearby can, and some parchment paper. I cut them into strips and hung them around the necks, and finally added a blob of putty where both ends of the ascot met, creating the illusion of a knot tying them together. Lastly, I did the antenna. So the original Amazon design features an antenna with a stem and a little bead at the end of it, like an anglerfish. I realized quickly that doing this would be both really hard and just not fun, so instead I'm taking a cue from the design of Amazon Omega from the 2016 series and simplifying it into a sleek, kind of horn-like antenna instead. This fits the vibe of the Tyranids a little better, which sure is a statement I am saying after giving them gay little scarves. Now, for the Tyranid Prime, I repeated the same steps, sans the horn antenna because bro already has one. After letting everything cure, I gave the models a quick scrub with dish soap. These were rubbed all over with Vaseline tip tools, and I don't want to cry later when the paint doesn't stick. But once dry, we slot them into their bases, prime them up, and get to work. Starting with Vallejo Black Airbrush Primer, I followed up with a base coat of Army Painter Fanatic Wild Green. For those expecting my obligatory Fanatic range opinion, they're pretty good. I like them. They're creamy and go out of the airbrush nice. They aren't blowing me away, but I think Army Painter upping their game is a win for everyone. After applying the green, I apply an overspray of AP Lime Green to highlight the top. After laying down those colors, I pause from the green to take some AP Fanatic Glowing Inferno and hit the undercarriage of the models covered up by the arms. I know what you're saying. If painting the undercarriage was going to be this hard, why not keep the arms separated first like you did earlier? And to that I have a very simple answer. Be nice to me. Before we go any further on the painting process, let's address the part of this paint job some of the more astute viewers noticed was going to be a problem. The stripes. So, freehanding of stripes, clean ones at that, is kind of hard. But we're dealing with another axis of bullshit here. Color theory dictates that red and green are opposites on the color wheel, and when you lay transparent opposing colors on top of each other, they kind of cancel each other out a little bit, meaning more layers. So having to freehand these stripes in multiple layers can take a very long time. I considered some alternative options. The first one I considered but ultimately never went with is hydro dipping. In short, this involves laying a transparent film on the top of the water, dipping the piece into the film, causing the film to wrap around the surface. You can make your own hydro dips using spray paints and swirling them together. I ultimately didn't go with this because 1, I am limited to whatever spray paint colors I can find, 2, I wasn't sure the swirls would convincingly look like Amazon's pattern, and 3, hydro dipping works best on round, uninterrupted surfaces, and Tyranids are not that. I'm definitely keeping this idea in the back pocket for later builds and think this strat is underused in the hobby. Maybe just not here. The second strategy was one I've seen done in other videos and thought might work here. Colored pencils. This is one of those obvious in hindsight tricks I can really see blowing up later on. I had high hopes for this, but I wanted to test it first, so I painted a piece of styrene the same green, took a pencil, and drew some lines on it. The results were bad. Like, I think worse than if I just painted the red right on. I'd hoped the colored wax material of the pencils would have greater opacity, but not only does it not, but the predictably grainy texture means the base coat shows through even more underneath. This could be entirely my fault for getting kids colored pencils and not like the art grade ones, and like hydro dipping, this does have some really good use cases, just once again, not here. And look, listen. All the clickbait thumbnails we see say work smart, not hard, and that's true sometimes. But also sometimes you can't half-ass something, and you just need to do the damn thing. So look, you're gonna take my hand, we'll tell each other it's okay. We're gonna go through this together, okay? Starting with my current favorite red, AK Interactive Kamen red, I used a finer tipped brush and just went in. And like the consummate procrastinator I am, I found it really wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. This red has good opacity, and in some cases I didn't even need to do multiple coats. After the first mini, I got it down pat. The process took several hours, so let's not kid ourselves about it being an easy process, but thankfully road hypnosis kind of kicked in and it went by fast in my brain. After doing this, I realized I fucked up the order of operations and forgot to edge highlight the green carapace first. So I painstakingly edge highlighted around the red, then picked out the red using Evil Sun's Scarlet and then straight orange at the tips. With that done, we can finally do all the other details. With that red still out, I painted the eyes in that color and then added some definition using purple shadows and a pale orange for highlights. An easy way to do transparent materials like gems or insect eyes is to paint the highlights and shadows upside down, followed by a dot at the top somewhere. For the Fleshborer Termagants, I painted their weapons red with the same red formula as before. I painted the gloves and boots, quote-unquote, of the models a black, followed by some dark gray highlights. Units with Devourers have their guns painted black the same way, just to distinguish from the other units. The antennae were painted yellow with some more of that red on top. The scarves were painted with Vallejo khaki, followed by highlights with an off-white. I did consider painting the teeth using these colors, but I honestly think that these, what I call jack-o'-lantern teeth, are one of my favorite monster design tropes, so I decided to leave those be. If you disagree with the decision, please tell me in the comments. I will be so afraid. Huge brain viewers will notice a dearth of Tyranid Prime painting footage here, and that's because this friend-shaped bug is going to have a different color scheme. Kind of. So Amazon comes in different flavors in green, starting with his bike, then in the SIC magazine, and later in the 2016 TV series, we're introduced to this version of Amazon in red. I figured using this color scheme would be a good way to break the monotony and signal to my opponent that this dude is hot shit. Same deal as before, just with some inverted colors. Carmine red as the base, Evil Sun Scarlet and orange as highlights, and then I use Wild Green to line up the stripes. I will note that the green on red lines took more coats than red on green. Not a huge deal, I had more room to move my brush around, so it sort of evened out. Eyes are likewise painted green instead of red. Everything else is largely the same. To imply that this big fuckhorn is the matured version of the little antenna his underlings have, I blended these into a yellow and then green. I prepared to enamel wash these minis to wrap up painting, and fellas, this is the moment where I almost ruined the project. First, I didn't add enough layers of gloss varnish to the minis. This made the enamel liquid fail to jump down the panels as intended, and also meant a weaker barrier between the solvents and paint. The result was pain. Paint was rubbing off on the edges. I panicked, took a breather, and astutely realized the friction was the main problem, so I switched to a brush dipped in lighter fluid, and this mostly eliminated rub-off. This was my fault, to be clear, but I do want to note from my time using AP Fanatic paints, they seem especially susceptible to this more than others. The Tyranid Prime, which was base coated in an AK range paint, did not have this issue at all, even with a meager protective coat. This isn't a knock on AP, what I'm doing is outside of conventional painting techniques, and they can't account for every use case. But if anyone else has experienced this issue with AP paints, let me know. Maybe I'm just a freak. But I'll be real, this was a downer. Up until now, I thought the paint jobs looked perfect, but not only did the enamel wash leave a grainy surface, it also nullified a lot of the highlights I added prior. This sucked. Off camera, I touched up the rub-offs and tried to restore as much of the original look as I could, but I was growing incredibly burnt out and accepted that I just needed to move on. They look good. Damn good, if even. Just not as good as I'd wanted, but, you know, it is what it is. The base we won't be spending much time on because, holy shit. Repositioning the minis to their intended position and gluing Mr. Alpha to his final base, I went with an easy rock quarry base to fit the theme. Some earth and sand with pebbles, painted gray with some dusty dull brown dry brushing, and a final matte varnish to call this done.
End result.
To be clear, this project was a knockout success. I accomplished what I intended to do by all margins. I have this problem I run into with making things, where I strive for my own definition of perfection, and sometimes if I feel like I denied myself a perfect victory, it completely knocks the wind out of my sails. Which is dumb, because it's still a victory. The enamel wash didn't work out great, sure, but they still look amazing, and the average person isn't going to give a shit. If Kamen Rider Amazon was real, he would tell me I did a good job, and then probably, Daisetsu-dan me in half. Anyway, that's the video. Thanks for coming along. If you like this video, hey, come here a sec. Hey, yeah, come here. Look me in the eyes real quick. You will subscribe. You will comment and like. You will share my funny little videos. You will do this. This will happen. This is not a request. Okay, bye.